I'm Samantha, and this is transirl. We have a great show for you tonight, but first I wanted to take a moment to reflect on some current events. I know many of us are now quarantined or sheltering in place due to the spread of COVID-19 around the world. Now more than ever, we need to make sure we're utilizing our virtual social networks to make sure that we are staying connected and safe. Just as this pandemic affects the world, it impacts the transgender community. I'm already hearing reports about individuals who are having difficulty getting their hormones because so many pharmacies are overwhelmed. I also know that people who are hoping to get on hormones are unable to do so because their regular endocrinologists are unavailable. I've heard and spoken with surgeons who have said that they're now putting their surgery schedule on hold until things wrap up or at least quiet down a little bit. And I know that's really impacting some individuals who have been waiting, in some cases, years for access to surgeries. So that is a huge difficulty that some of us are facing right now. Job loss and cutbacks are rampant, and I've been affected by that as well. I'll actually be out of work next week on a furlough. So that's difficult. And maybe even more scary than that is that some of us will become ill ourselves, and some of us will lose people we know or love. Times like these are when we really need each other the most. And I know it's not always easy to ask for help or know when to reach out to others who are struggling, but we all need to take a little extra time and protect our family and friends and let them know they're not alone. And speaking of not being alone, joining me tonight from the director's chair is Stephen. And how are you holding up over there?
Well, good evening from the, unfortunately, the coronavirus capital of the United States, New York right now. Just want to take a moment to thank all of the first responders and all those who are in the front line of this, all of the healthcare professionals and everybody who's taking part in doing the best they can. A big thank you to our governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, a fellow person born in Queens, New York, as I was. And also just a thank you to everyone who's taking advantage of technology. My wife is a teacher of sixth grade, and she's been doing live lessons with her students every day, and so they're keeping them engaged, and it's something that we can get through, and it's, as you said, Samantha, it's something where we just all have to rely on each other, and I can't wait for the euphoria which will happen when this is actually over, and it will be. It's just a matter of when.
It will. And to your point, the first responders and for those frontline people who are working every day to allow society to continue on, truckers and people working at pharmacies and grocery stores and those other critical applications where we need people just to keep things rolling. They're putting their lives in their line, and absolutely very appreciative of the work that they're doing. So Stephen will be monitoring the chats through the night. So if you have any questions for our guest, please make sure to submit them there. And with that, let's get to our interview for the evening. Tonight's guest is an author, advocate, and model. She's active across social media and actively shares her journey. With that, I'd like to welcome Hope Giselle to the show. Welcome, Hope. So I mentioned that you are an author. I actually have a copy of Hope's book with me here, so Becoming Hope. And it was a really wonderful read. Many of our stories of transition share common threads, but it's really eye-opening to see through the lenses of other people's experiences. All of our stories are different and unique. And tonight I really wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about your journey, Hope.
Oh, well, I'm super excited. First of all, thank you for supporting and being able to talk about that in a way that's just really affirming, especially as a Black trans woman who is an author, right? Like, that's not something that you often hear because oftentimes we aren't afforded those same opportunities to do those things. So I'm like always excited to be able to talk about the book or to hear people's thoughts about it. It's really amazing. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So let's get into it here. I was hoping that we could kick things off with you sharing a little bit about the environment you grew up in and where you grew up.
So a lot of people will usually pin me like in like a metropolitan city outside of the one that I actually grew up in, but I grew up in Miami. And for a large portion of my childhood, I grew up in the projects. So for those of you all who aren't familiar with like what projects are, they're like housing facilities that the government usually issues and delegates for people of color, be it brown or black. And they're usually some sort of low income area. And these areas usually tend to be the worst, right? They run rampant with like drugs and, gangs in some cases, depending on like what region or, part of the world that you live in. And it was tough. It was really tough for me growing up and kind of finding my way when I lived in an environment like that. Uh, so Miami in itself like really supports like this eccentric and like really just like being yourself sort of vibe. However, there's this like underbelly of Miami when you are a person of color, and especially when you're a black person, and especially growing up as a black young boy. It wasn't as forgiving and as open to my my eclecticism as I would have hoped that it
So,
would be.
yeah, let's talk about that, right? From a very young age, you were very confident in yourself and your identity. And I mean, you knew from very early on that you didn't identify as straight. But I'm curious, how did that treat you in school and in your neighborhood? Did that ever get you in trouble?
In trouble, no. Bullied, yes. I think that just me being who I am and who I was at the time was just something that was very new. And I think a lot of it was because I was supposed to feel shame, and not feeling that shame had more consequences on me than actually living and being who I was. A lot of the backlash that I got and a lot of the bullying that I experienced was due to a plethora of things, right? Like my mom was one of the few people in the projects that was able to provide, my brother and myself at the time with like luxury, So if we could balance things that black people in those sort of areas value. Like I had every pair of Jordans that came out. I had all of the new sneakers. I wore, all of the latest brands. Like I was wearing Tommy Hilfiger and like you name it, I had it. So there was like jealousy from that standpoint. But then there was also the idea that I was this little flamboyant gay kid that was just running around, these housing projects that were they were like essentially promoting the idea of toxic masculinity as we know it today, right? And so my freedom to do that and do so shamelessly offended a lot of people, and especially it offended a lot of the men that lived in that area. In school, however, I found solace. I found a lot of solace because I loved to learn. I loved to be educated, because the one thing that people couldn't take away from me was, that I was smart. If you were going to call me the F word, if you were going to call me the S word, if you were going to, give me all of these names and colloquialisms, you were going to say that I was a smart F word. You were going to say that I was a smart, whatever else you were going to call me. And I made sure to kind of live in that. And eventually I found theater through my elementary school drama teacher, Miss Ryu. And if you ever see this, I am still looking for you because I haven't seen her since elementary school, but
Oh,
she really helped to give me a safe space before we even knew and started naming what safe spaces were. And I appreciate her for that.
there are so many teachers out there that provide that safe space. And for a lot of kids growing up, trans kids, queer kids, gay kids, some of the first places they have those safe places are in those classrooms. And, I had those teachers, the ones where you could hang out during lunch or whatever. And for the kids who were on the fringe, the ones who weren't cool or didn't fit in with the mainstream,
Right.
that could be such a lifesaver. And, it's just so important. And it's, something I'm really glad to see now that a lot of those teachers that were offering that are now getting involved in GSA clubs at high schools and middle schools now. And it's wonderful to have that support, in schools like that. So you identified as being gay, I mean, basically since elementary school, but
Yeah.
for you personally, you avoided officially coming out to your family for a
It
while.
wasn't, I don't know if I call it avoidance. I think a lot of it just was lack of conversation, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I was very open and vocal with other people. I just never, and it wasn't one of those things where I was like, I had like a small group of people, and like, it was like my four friends, and like they were the only people that knew, and I lived this stealth life. Like I was not that kid. I was very obviously gay, but I
Right.
think just for the sake of conversations that I had been privy to. I remember one instance in particular that like burns in my mind every time I think about like why I didn't just say something to my family sooner. I remember I had to be in like maybe like the fourth grade or so, and my mom was dating this guy at the time who was like a little bit of a ruffian, and I was coming home from school, and him and a couple of like the neighborhood local guys were just like across the street. And I had a really bad day at school that day. I was not feeling it. I wasn't feeling him. I wasn't feeling anybody that was speaking to me at the time. Like I was ready to just go home, take a shower, and like eat whatever my grandfather had cooked that day. And he spoke to me, and I just remember being so upset that like I didn't even think to like I didn't want to speak to him, and so I just kept walking. And about 3 days later, it was a Saturday, and my grandparents and I always had like this ritual where we would like watch HBO on Saturdays and like just watch every movie, any movie that would come on, and just like laugh, and that would be our thing. And my grandmother would make cookies or whatever, and my mom comes barging in, just in the middle of our movie day. And she's like a hellfire. And all three of us are like, what the hell? And so she immediately just starts beating me like I stole something. Like, and everybody is confused. My grandparents are confused. I'm confused. And like as a child, now everything that I did that week starts playing in my head. Like I'm like, did she find something? Like what did I do? Like what teacher could have called the house? Like I'm like in my mind, I'm just like, what could I possibly like be deserving? Like what did I do that deserves this right now? And finally, when my grandparents were able to like semi calm her down, she just is like, so and so said that he spoke to you and you didn't speak back and you turned away and walked away from him like a little sissy. And then it hit me. And I was like, oh, I'm in trouble because I embarrassed your boyfriend. And not because I didn't speak to an adult, not because I was rude to an adult that spoke to me. I'm in trouble because I embarrassed your boyfriend, because then his friends were able to laugh at the fact that his girlfriend has a son who is a sissy. And so now that's the conversation that's running around the hood, is that, your son is a sissy. And so it's an embarrassment. I'm in trouble for being myself. And I just remember my grandparents were just infuriated. Like they were infuriated, and they were just like, what? Like, get out of our house, like just get out. And I remember my mom saying something to the effect of, do you want to be a girl? And I was just like, no, I don't want to be a girl, because at the time, like, especially growing up in that era, like, I didn't know about transness. I didn't know that I could do that. And so my mom uttered something that has never, left me. And she said, essentially, if you come home as anything other than my son, I don't know you and I won't come to the funeral. And I was confused for so many different reasons, because I didn't even know that I had the option to come home as anything other than her son. Like, I didn't know that that was a choice that I could make. Um, and then I was confused because I was just like, yeah, this can never happen then. No matter what I feel and how I'm feeling and what I know about myself, if I can't come home as a girl, then I really can't come home as like gay, because then it'll be a thing. So if I just never confirm it, then that'll be just as good as like, not saying it. But I never really hid who I was. I was always just this very flamboyant, like you can look at that person and say, yeah, they're probably gay, coming from down the street sort of person. But I didn't say anything about it until I had to.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of like really important things that I can relate to. Growing up, a lot of us weren't exposed to anyone who was transgender. We didn't know this
Right.
was an option. And for many of us, there's a revelation moment where we finally understand or at least are exposed to somebody else who's trans, and it clicks in our head like, oh my gosh, that's actually a possibility. But the reaction from your mom, and something I hear from other from a lot of people, that difficulty in understanding or wanting to even deal with the subject, where it's not exactly a secret, but it's not being talked about, right? It's almost like a don't ask, don't tell sort of situation. It's not, everyone's just sort of hoping to get by as long as they possibly can. I think probably you were, and probably your mom was as well, right?
I I think everybody like was just trying to live the whatever fantasy they could live until the shoe dropped. Like I feel like everybody was just trying to get by, like you say. Um, because I remember after I said it, my mom called my grandmother into the room, and she's like, he finally told us. That was like after I came out the first time. And honestly, I never really came out as trans. I just kind of started living, and like they had to deal. But I just wasn't doing the whole conversation again. Like that just wasn't a thing. I didn't feel like I owed that to anyone. But yeah, so I definitely think that it was one of those moments of like everybody just trying to like get by and make sense of it until they couldn't do it anymore. And so I kind of bursted everybody's bubble when I was actually when I was about, I want to say 12, because I was still in middle school. And I came out right before high school. I came out like right before high school, and I was in middle school, so it was probably like my 8th grade year where I like, told my mom, or seventh, yeah, seventh, because I was still going to a different middle school, and then I transferred for my last year. So yeah, I came out in about the 7th grade, and so my mom had like 2 years of middle school and then like the rest of high school to figure it out.
Okay. Um, from high school, you went to college. You went to Alabama State University. What I'm curious about is what was it like to leave the city? Right, you had grown up there in Miami, so you left the state. You had freedom from your family. What was that like for you? And how did you use that opportunity to really explore your identity?
Uh, Honestly, it was the most liberating thing in the world. I think so. What most people don't know about that story is that I actually got into NYU. I busted my butt. Like I worked really hard to get into NYU, full scholarship. Like I was top 10% of my class. Like I knew that I needed scholarship money because my mom just didn't have it like that to send me to New York. Like with our money. So I worked really hard to make sure that I could secure myself enough financial aid and enough scholarships to go wherever I wanted to go. But I got into NYU, and that was like my dream, to go to Tisch School of the Arts. And um, essentially, I ended up not being able to go because they needed money for something else that they wouldn't allow my scholarships or my financial aid to cover. And I remember my mom giving me like this ultimatum, and she was just like, either you find somewhere else to go or you find a job. And I knew that finding a job meant that I would be stuck in Miami with her. And like the whole point was graduate high school, you get away, you get to be you, like you get to be yourself. And so I knew that I
Right.
had to figure something out. And it just so happened that like one of her friends called, and she was having a conversation about, what happened with NYU. And she's like, well, Alabama State has a great, theater program. Like, why doesn't, he just try to go there? And so I applied, and literally the next morning I got an acceptance letter. And it was just really funny because I didn't even know what an HBCU was. Like the only schools that I had my sights set on were like schools that I guess like are now like PWIs, but like I had no idea what an HBCU was. And I just knew that it was not Florida. I knew that it was like hours away from Miami and that I would just be far enough away from her. And so leaving and going to Alabama um, was a breath of fresh air. Like being on campus, like the second that my mother left, I just remember feeling like this weight lifted and feeling like, oh my God, I can actually be myself and I can actually love on myself in whatever way that I want to. And it wasn't an hour after my mom left that I went and like my cousin put braids in my hair. Like I immediately started to feminize. And this wasn't even like my, my transition. This was just me exploring who I was in a way that made me feel a lot more comfortable than I was able to do when I was living with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a freeing, even though I was in Alabama, and like I know a lot of people are like, what? But like, even though I was in Alabama, it was this freeing experience because it wasn't where I was, it was who I was with that was holding me back. And so once the weight of my mom's like iron fist got off of me, I was able to like really explore myself, and it became like a therapeutic experience from day one.
Absolutely. It allowed yourself to be you, right? Explore yourself and just live without that fear, right, of
Right.
anything else or anyone else's opinions. So one thing I wanted to talk about was in your book, you said one of the defining moments in your journey was when you first saw a video with Janet Mock. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit of what that video did to help you in understanding your identity.
It was a really random morning. I kind of woke up and just was not feeling myself. I just remember waking up and this was at the time where I was doing drag to earn money as a broke college student. And it was like a morning after like a night of club and drag. And I say drag because it was very bad drag. And it was a morning after one of those nights of performing. And I just remember waking up and like my lashes were like on the pillow, my wig was off, I had on like this stocking cap. I think I took off my corset in the midst of like slumber. I don't know, but I just remember sitting up on my bed, and the way that I had my dorm room set up is like as soon as I sat up, there was a mirror there. And I just broke down crying. I just felt ugly. And I never had like insecurities around my image or the way that I looked before. So this was the first time that like I looked at myself and just felt disgusted with what I saw and who I saw. Mm. And my coping mechanism was like, well, I'm going to do my hair. I had really nice natural hair, curly. And so I was just like, well, let's look up some tutorials. Like, let's get out of this funk and just do our hair. And I don't know how, I don't know why, but Janet Mock popped up like in the midst of my natural hair search. And if people don't know who she is, she has this beautiful, natural, like curly bushel of hair. And so that's the only reason I could assume that she popped up. Nevertheless, I watched one video, and one video turned into 40 videos, and 40 videos turned into an email to her, and that email turned into a response. And it just really awakened me to understand like there was a word for what I was feeling, and there was a word for who I was, and it wasn't this androgynous gay boy that I was trying to pass myself off on. It was trans. And I don't think that I've heard anybody else with like a quicker picker upper trans journey than me, because literally that day, like I went out, I bought a bra, an ill-fitting bra, but I bought a bra, and like I threw away everything in my closet that reminded me of something masculine, anything that I could afford to give away or throw away. And immediately I jumped into transition mode, and it was the best thing I could have done for myself. Like the best thing I could have done.
I've heard a lot of egg cracking stories. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before, but when someone's egg cracks, it's when they like realize, oh gosh, I'm transgender. That is a very dramatic egg cracking story there, right? You just went straight into it. But I love that. And Janet Mock is an icon, right?
Yes.
She's an incredibly visible, wonderful advocate, actress, model. And it's so wonderful that you were able to find those videos at a time where you really needed to see that.
Yeah. Yes. I didn't know who this woman was. And then the fact that there was this beautiful Black woman who just happened to be trans and um, was really just learned. And I felt like I saw myself for the first time. You know, there were trans women in media and, you know, kind of like on, you know, the screen, but a lot of the girls, because I was younger, you know, they were all Instagram models, and so it was like they had very little to offer intellectually, or, you know, they fit these tropes that I don't necessarily subscribe to, and so I had seen some, but like there was not a role model figure. There was nothing that really pulled me in, that explained what it was. Like, you know, like for the longest, I was like, oh, well, you know, she used to be a boy, and now she's a girl. But Janet broke it down in one of her speeches in a way that like brought me to tears in my dorm room.
Mm.
And every now and then I still go back to that old speech and I watch it and like remind myself, like, this is why I do this. This is why I do what I do. And this is part of the reason that I am the woman that I am today, is like listening to these words that affirmed me so much in a time that I didn't even realize that I needed to be affirmed in.
I think it's one of the most beautiful things in the community when somebody inspires the next generation to also advocate, you know, pass on that torch. And I think that's such a wonderful thing. I always, you know, sometimes I'll hear from people who saw pictures or photos of me early in their transition and that inspired
Right,
them to reach out. But the only reason I'm here is because people before me were doing the same thing.
right.
And it's just such a wonderful thing to be able to be a part of that chain and family and growth. And you actually were a part of that too at your university with the start of an LGBT organization there as well, correct?
Yeah. The
So how was that? I mean, Alabama State it's a historically very religious,
yeah,
traditional
yeah.
university. How was that?
It was not easy. And quite frankly, the story is kind of catty. Well, the ending of the story is sort of catty, but I remember just like needing a GSA. I grew up in a high school that had a GSA. My high school, like Miami High, was literally High School Musical. Like if you needed to go to a high school that was like the ones that you saw on TV, like my high school was the place to be. And it's, you know, it was so crazy. But when I got to college and they didn't have that, like, of course, like I was just like, oh, I'm gonna have a Moesha moment. For those of you all who don't know what Moesha or who Moesha is, it's a fictional sitcom from the 90s. Brandy, go watch it. But like, you know, I had a Moesha moment and I was just like, okay, so let's do this. Let's figure this out. We have to get this going. And there was a lot of resistance because we needed an advisor and nobody wanted to be my advisor. Like not a single person on staff, not even the people in the theater department that I was majoring in wanted to be an advisor for me. And so it took me finding a janitor, like a default janitor, and having the janitor be like an advisor for us. And it just so happened like that all she had to do was like have an employee ID. They didn't really check the ID to see like what her job was, but she was just like one of the nice janitor ladies that like, you know, looked out and made sure I was okay and like always checked on me. And so she had an employee ID number and they let us form the club with a janitor as our advisor. And we had one of the biggest events at Alabama State in the history, thrown by me. We had a live reenactment of a Beyonce concert, and the
Mm.
proceeds went to the Montgomery AIDS Outreach Fund. And so we called it the Beyonce Experience. And I performed as Beyonce for 2 hours. And we did it in the Acadome, which is the main performance space. No other club outside of like a coronation for a queen or like, you know, convocation, no other club could just get the Acadome. And not only did the little GSA get the Acadome, but we had an entire essentially drag show in the Acadome for our first event. And so that was like a major deal. A lot of people actually showed up. We raised about $1,200 for the Montgomery AIDS Outreach. And right after that, they found a loophole and shut us down. They
Oh
knew
my
that we wouldn't
gosh.
to afford, yeah, like So essentially, the entire thing was a setup from the beginning. The clubs are supposed to be afforded a budget. We never got a budget. And so they knew that we never got a budget. And the reason that they gave us the Acadome was because they knew that we wouldn't be able to pay it off. So there was a bunch of labor that went into setting up the lights and setting up the stage and setting up all of these things. And so they waited until we officially gave Montgomery Aid Outreach all of the money that we earned because we didn't think that we needed it as a club. I was a new person. Our advisor was a janitor, so she didn't know, the ins and outs. And it was run by a bunch of other students who understood my vision and other queer kids on campus. And so we were celebrating in this amazing thing that we had just done. It was historic. Like they wrote an article about it and everything. And like a week later, they were just like, so do you guys have the money to pay for the Acadome and the lights and the labor for the stage? And we were just like, well, how much is it? And it was $5,000. And there was no way they knew that we didn't have $5,000. And so essentially the way to get us to not be a club was to allow us to have this very elaborate performance and then to shut us down. And that's kind of what they did. And
That's
thankfully,
it's ridiculous.
it was really bad, but thankfully we ended up getting it back together once an alumni came and started another organization that was a GSA, and then allowed myself and a couple of other students to join under his tutelage. But it was a task and a half, like that second time around, because they knew that he knew a lot more about forming it in a way that it was going to last, and they were very hesitant to let him do it. And by that time, my presence on campus had really garnered a lot more staff appreciation for LGBT kids, and so we actually had an advisor that knew what she was doing to help him, and it's still there. So I'm really happy about
Good.
what I started.
Well, I'm glad they're still there. The unfortunate middle part there, though, gosh, that's
Yeah.
unreal, but not unexpected either, right? If people can find a loophole to shut down something they don't want, they'll find
Yeah.
it. But since graduating, you've remained active as an advocate. I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about some of the projects you're working on now.
So I have the Allow Me movement, which is my nonprofit, and it's essentially just a program and organization where we help to uplift and empower the voices of young LGBT people of color. We have a lot of programs that are supposed to be geared towards LGBT youth, but none of them really cater towards the needs of their youth of color. And I thought that it was time that we helped to really do that and help to cultivate that. Most of the money for Allow Me is coming out of my pocket, so it is a very slow process. Um, but I am looking for grant funding so that I can make Allow Me, my job. I want to do nothing but focus on helping to amplify the voices of the youth in ways that include tech and leadership and, things outside of the arts. I think that while I want to motivate us to do the things that we love, not every single person in the LGBT community wants to be a dancer or a singer or, do hair or be a makeup artist. And I think that it's important that we help to cultivate the minds that are outside of those things, as well as the minds that are
Hmm.
inside those things. So Allow Me is just a bridge and sort of like what I call my spider web, where we go and we cast nets in different major cities and connect those children with people who are actually doing the work in their cities, connect them with LGBT doctors, connect them with allies, connect them with people who help them see themselves in the field that they want to be in, and then bring them together once or twice a year to do an entire retreat where we talk about building those leadership skills, creating your own podcast, creating your own web show. Figuring out ways to facilitate while trans, figuring out ways to deliver messages that you think are important, and really just kind of hone in on their skills and all of that, amazing stuff that you are building for yourself. But we're scheduled to do a hard launch in 2021 just because of funding issues and just me being able to get grant funding. I estimated to take about like 50K for me to actually be able to focus on Allow Me for an entire year while also like building funding at the same time and traveling and doing all that stuff. So that is my goal. And by 2021, we should be able to do that. So you'll see a lot more from Allow Me at that point.
Well,
But
I
for
can't
now, I'm
wait. I
just
think that's such a, I mean, it's a fantastic, it's a fantastic effort, right?
Mhm.
Supporting trans people of color is essential because there are so many people who are in uh, social situations or economic situations where they just don't have the ability to excel or get into those roles and fields. And part of that support of trans people of color is also making sure that there's good representation out there as
Yeah.
well. I am curious what you think of the current representation of trans people of color on social media is.
When you have shows like Pose, I think that those shows are really helping to change the way that we think about trans folks in media. I'm friends with most of the cast. Actually, that's my good sibling, India Moore. That's on the screen there. I love them to death, and when we think about the way that folks like India and folks like Angelica Ross and the rest of the cast, MJ Rodriguez, are really helping to shift the narrative in the way that we see not only trans folks in media, but trans folks of color in media. Um, it helps people to see us as human. While I do think that there is still a shift that needs to be made with the narratives that surround trans people as only being able to play destitute sex worker, victimized characters. That is not the story for all of us. And while I do think that it's important that people know that those things are happening, I would love to see us be depicted as regular working people, regular loving people, regular sexually active people, who occupy spaces the same way that everybody else does. And I think that we're getting there. We're definitely getting to a point where people are seeing us as just that, people. And the less of the monolith and the other that we become, the more that it becomes easy for people to accept the idea that we live among them, and we're here to just kind of get through life just like they are. But I'm really appreciative of the way that shows like Pose and other shows and people like Janet and the folks who are allies of the community, like Bad Bunny, and guys like Lil Nas X are just like coming out and really helping to amplify the message around trans people and the way that we're seen on television and in media all the time. So it's refreshing to say the least.
Definitely. I think from a social media standpoint, though, it's strange. There's algorithms, right? There's algorithms on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and it seems like almost like the software itself does a good job of keeping the trans community as a whole from seeing the whole picture. And it's probably not just limited to the trans community, but I'm always surprised at for the suggestions in my Instagram, for example, that I very rarely see trans people of color come up in that list. And uh, I don't know. I don't know what the story is behind that. If it's just because they're trying to look at the people who you're already following, so it assumes you want to follow more people like that.
Yes.
But
That's
yeah,
exactly, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So I have a couple of folks who work at Instagram who I kind of have asked this question to. And so it's the same thing that Facebook is doing, especially now because Facebook owns Instagram and they run on the same sort of system where it pulls the people that you find most interesting and it helps to suggest people by the list of the people that you're following. So if you want to change up and see more trans people of color in your suggested list, then it's like it would be better for you to follow like an influx of them at one time. And then your suggested list will kind of sort of shift to meet and match that. Because for a while, all I was getting was like pop stars, like I was, because there was like a week where I followed a bunch of, like, I don't typically follow a bunch of celebrities, but there was like one week where I followed like Rihanna and like Kim Kardashian and Beyonce. Like I followed a bunch of celebrities because I was getting ready to do a podcast about something and I needed to have their pages readily available. And then every suggested person was like Britney Spears or Christina Aguilera. And then once I got back to my regular regimen of like following trans pages and LGBT groups and organizations, then I got like back into the swing of things. So I would suggest like maybe if you want to see more trans people of color like on your suggested list, maybe just follow like a couple in like influx that you like, and like you'll probably see a change in like maybe like the next week when it starts to add like new suggestions.
Yeah. You've got to break the algorithm, basically. But let's talk a little bit about race, because it's 2020, but we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues. Unfortunately, we've been dealing with for generations.
To minuscule repercussions for any of those things, and I think that for me, a lot of my issue with this is the silence that comes from our white counterparts in the community. A lot of it is, feeling awkward about having this conversation with some of my white trans sisters. A lot of it is awkward, is me feeling awkward about voicing my opinions about their silence without, them feeling like I'm empathetic to the idea of what it's like to be a white trans woman. But there's the reality. And I think that a lot of times as a Black trans woman, the reality that we live is a little bit more harsh than the ones that white trans women or like just most people in the entire community deal with. Being a Black trans woman puts you in so much more danger than being a part of any other microcosm of the LGBTQIA plus community. And there's just not enough talk about it. There's just not enough research done about it. There's not enough resources being given. Like every time I turn around and I look at some of these major grants and a lot of these major fundings and scholarships who can offer help to pay for surgeries and can offer help to pay for housing, and I look at the list of grantees, it's like white. One person of color, not a Black person, but a person of color to fill the box and say that they did white. And it's just like, it's not to say that these people don't need it, but when we look at the numbers and we look at the statistics and we look at like the way that communities are impacted by social order and all of the there's just a disproportionate way in which Black trans women are being affected by the way that society views the community as a whole. And there's not nearly enough resources, there's not nearly enough protection, there's not nearly enough conversations, and there's not nearly enough comfort to have those conversations with our white counterparts without us feeling like we're going to be attacked for telling our truth in the moment, or without us making someone feel like their issues are not as important in the moment. And so it's just really hard to be empathetic while also trying to get your point across. It's really hard to not sound wounded or angry or upset or like you're blaming, the particular sister that you're talking to in the moment. But I definitely think that there has to be space, right? Space made to discuss what's happening to us in ways that don't hold people accountable for actions that they did not commit, but hold people accountable for the actions of folks that look like them. And accountable in the sense that you're made aware of what people that look like you are doing and how they make people that look like me feel, and give you the ask or give you the challenge or the task of going back into that community and figuring out how you can help us, without it turning into like a yelling match about oppression, and without it being the oppression Olympics between, the Black girls and the white girls. And it just shouldn't be that way. But race is a tricky subject, and it always will be. I think that it's just one of those things that as long as we know of racism and as long as it exists, it will always be a hard conversation to have, and there's just no way around it.
It can definitely be a hard conversation, but it's an essential conversation. And, that was beautifully said, by the way. I think as a community, however defined a trans community is, we have to listen. And we have to listen to trans people of color. We have to listen to those experiences. We have to listen to Black trans women. there's more to the story of the community than what I see. And although I try to be aware of it, I'm definitely not perfect at it.
Right.
And there's just so much more to do. And to your point about being able to talk without it turning into a fight or an escalation, we need that. We need those dialogues. We need those conversations. And more importantly, we need to be able to stand, side by side and face
Right.
some of these issues. We're still not talking about them nearly enough as we should. I've heard a statistic thrown around out there that the average life expectancy for a Black trans woman in the United States is 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's outrageous. The fact that that's even possible should have all of us outraged and fighting together, because I that just hurts me. It hurts me to know that my sisters have to live with that and face that every single day. And we need to work together. That's the only way we're ever going to get through this, is together, because everyone else is still trying to tear us apart, but we're here. We can be here
Right.
for each other.
Right.
There's a lot more work to do, for sure.
There, I think.
Last question for you oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think that it's gonna take us to really drop some of our social sort of plagues, like the things that we are so hell bent on focusing on as women, right? Especially as binary trans women, I think a lot of the time we focus on things that are so minuscule and so ridiculously unimportant that we can't come together. And so you're absolutely right. And that was amazing. An amazing point that you just made. Like, we have to do this together. There's no way around it.
I agree. Uh, I have one last question for you before we get to our viewer questions, and that is, what do you hope to accomplish with your platform and your story?
I honestly just, my goal when I created my channels and when I started to go live on Facebook and everything was to be the change that I wanted to see. And I tell all the young girls that all the time, be the change that you want to see. If Hope Giselle doesn't do it for you, then create your own version. If Samantha doesn't do it for you, create your own version. If T.S. Madison isn't what you want to see, create your own version. If Janet isn't saying what you need to feel, in your soul, in your spirit, then be that person for yourself, and help to inspire other people. I love it when folks ask me, like, like, how do I become, and how do I just, these days, it's as simple as turning on your computer and doing research, right? Do your research, become well versed in whatever it is that you want to know about. Go to school if you got to, go to class, do whatever it is that you feel you need to do to become well versed in whatever it is that you're passionate about, and then speak on it. Be that person, put that energy into the world, and people will listen eventually. It just takes one
I love
person.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true, right? Like, if I'm not your cup of tea, look for somebody else, or,
Right.
do it
Be
yourself. I
that.
think that's
Be
so
that.
important, right? All right, so we do have some viewer questions I wanted to get to here today. So if you're watching live on YouTube or on Facebook and have a question for Hope or myself, put it in the chat. We'll try to get to it, as many as we can here. I know we are running a little bit long, but I wanted to start with some questions that were submitted earlier this week through Instagram. So the first question there is, I'm 14 years old and transgender, but I don't know how to tell my mom. It's harder because we are African American. I tried to give her hints, but she went in a rant about how she'll never support anything like that. How do I help her understand?
I think for me, especially because I did come out as, like, gay at such a young age, and I kind of wish that I would have waited a little bit longer. My biggest advice is going to be, do what keeps you safe, because I think we know in the Black community, especially dealing with African American mothers and communities and families, that sometimes coming out, while it might soothe your soul, it might not be the safest option for you mentally, physically, emotionally. And so while it might feel good to just get the words out, I think that it's best to wait until you know that there's somewhere for you to go, or somewhere for you to be, or somewhere that has resources for you that you trust. Because once you put it out there, there is no taking it back. And the feelings and emotions that come along with it, while they won't be your fault, they're not always the best or the nicest. And sometimes it's a lot easier to deal with them from afar than it is to deal with them when you have no choice but to take it. And at 14, um, it's not to say that you don't have a voice or that you can't find solace in your own home, but it's to say that you shouldn't have to find solace. You know, I know what that's like being at home and having to find a cubby hole to hide yourself in the second that you come in the door. And it's just, it's not worth it. And so I found solace in school, in my art, you know, in other things when I was away. And that became, you know, so much easier than dealing with my mom and her feelings around it. But if you know that it's going to be a potentially violent exchange, I just don't think that it's worth it. It's never worth it when it comes at the cost of my peace in a place where I have to reside, you know, and it's never worth it to risk a safe home environment, for the moment, um, for the uncertainty of what the streets might offer somebody who is Black and who is, you know, new at this and still finding herself. We lose so many young girls to, you know, sex work, and we lose so many young girls to just life in general. And I feel if you can wait, if you can afford to just, you know, find solace outside of the home for now, do that. Um, and if you can't, if it's something that you are feeling really strongly about and you know that you need to do away with this now, then I say that find the resources, and figure out who your family is and figure out what the next steps would be and could be should things become unbearably violent for you, and figure out what resources there will be, available for you as far as your mental health, because it's more than a physical journey. It's more than, you know, getting out of the house and taking a deep breath and everything is okay at that point. It's about stabilizing, you know. And I never want to encourage anyone to just run away, from any of the problems that they might have without understanding where they go to stabilize themselves. And this is just a really hard question, because I remember what it's like to be you. So just keep that in mind.
That was the perfect answer. I can't add anything more to that. Safety is so important. So let's look at our next question here, and that is, how long was the process to start hormones? So, Hope.
My process wasn't fairly long, but in all honesty, I had a really good trans guy friend. He came to Alabama State the year after I transitioned, and he was a whiz. He's my brother. I love him to death. His name is Caleb, and Caleb is the reason that you guys have hope. To be perfectly honest, like I started, you know, the transition, but medically and, you know, on paper, like Caleb was the person that helped to push me, and so it took me about maybe 2 months, like after. So I was transitioning visually for about 6 months. And then when Caleb got to Alabama State, it took him about 2 months, to give me the information about where to go. So it was not a long process. And if Caleb had been there when I transitioned, I'm sure it would have been an even faster process. However, my doctor, was told that if he openly practiced, HRT therapy, that they would shut his practice down. So he couldn't go to the classes that he needed to actually get well versed in what he was giving. So everything that he was learning was from word of mouth of his trans patients and what we were hearing and Google. So that was the toss up.
It's really common for trans patients to end up teaching their doctors, right? I've had that happen a lot of times where, doctors want to ask me questions about certain experiences or things like that. It's like, wait, I'm paying you, right? Why?
Right,
and I'm
right,
helping you. But I mean, the process to start hormones, it varies. It can vary for a lot of individuals. For me, it was pretty short. I started work with the therapist after I officially came out and was able to start hormones in about 2 months. But there's this kind of a nuanced question, right? Depending on
right,
your age and where you're at in your
right.
life, it could be longer, it could be shorter. And then, of course, it's also important to talk about that not everyone who transitions is on
Want
hormones,
to hormone.
and that's
Yeah,
valid too.
right, right.
So I think it's kind of a
Absolutely.
it's kind of a tough question to say like this is going to be your journey, but
Right.
um, yeah.
Especially
All
because
right,
we
next
think
user.
a short process. So
Yeah, definitely. Next question here. This is a good one. How does one practice self love in the face of dysphoria? Wow, this is one that I'm curious to know your answer because I need help.
honestly, I think that it took me a while to figure this one out, but I've had to understand, and I have this mantra, and I guess I'll share it with you all, is that you have everything and you are everything that you need in this moment to succeed. And I say that to myself every morning. And so, no matter what I look like, no matter if my hormones are making me feel extremely feminine, or if I feel like I missed a shot, or if someone, gave me a dirty look or said something mean to me at the mall, I always go back to that mantra, which is I have everything that I need and I am everything that I need in this moment to succeed. And anything more, will come to me as the universe decides to give it to me. But I find that those words really help to affirm me in whatever space that I'm in. Just
I
by
love that.
knowing, just by knowing that I own this space and I own this body in this moment and that it's mine and I should be proud of it.
That is perfect. We do need to be proud of who we are and what we become through this process. We are only judging ourselves, really, and we can be so harsh. Dysphoria can
Yeah.
sometimes be so destructive in everything that we have accomplished in a transition. And you can throw all that out the window because you're fixated on one thing that's just driving you
Yeah.
crazy today. And you have to save those good moments. On the other side of dysphoria is euphoria, right? Those moments where you are truly in your element, you feel yourself, you are who you are, and you have to save those moments in a jar for those bad days because those bad days will come.
Right.
And you have to be prepared for them. And gosh, that mantra is so awesome. And I know that I also rely on my friends too, my community. I've got my close girlfriends out there who I can talk to about tough days, and they're there to lift me up, just like I'm there to lift them up. And I find that pretty helpful in those situations.
Hmm.
All right, there was one more question submitted here, and that is, do you think we need more transgender representation in elected officials?
Mm, like I would like to see it, but not for the purpose of it just being like, oh, we have a trans elected official, right? If somebody, and I know that this is probably like an unpopular opinion because I feel like I sound like a Republican white man, but if someone is good at the job, then they get the job. Like that's what I would wish for. Like that would be my goal, right? Is that that statement actually be true? Because we know that people say that, but it's not true. But I guess that my goal for that would be that people actually uphold that. If a trans person is best for that position, then I would hope that a trans person would get that. But I don't want to just go handing out titles just because we feel like we need to see or be affirmed by trans people in those positions because oftentimes what I'm seeing is that some of the people that are running for office that are trans are just not ready. And um, while there are a selected few of them that are, and they're phenomenal and they're doing great jobs, I feel like the hype of the trans, just train that the media is taking right now a lot of folks are kind of like jumping the gun with their plans to be a part of this wave, and it's not doing us a service to have people just on the ballot taking up space from people who may not be trans but may be able to fight for what we need a little bit better. And so while it might not be the popular, Barack Obama answer, I definitely, while it would be nice to see people who are trans there, I would also like to see people who are qualified in trans there, and people who have logged the man hours and done the research and the work necessary to be a good elected official.
Oh, I agree with you. I have no arguments with what you just said. If there's a trans person who's running for office, I would prefer that the fact that they're trans is the last thing on their resume, right? I want their experiences, their education, their know-how to get the job done to be up there at the top. And that's the kind of trans representation I want, is somebody who does a fantastic job because they're highly qualified and they just happen to be trans, right?
Right.
So I'm with you. I see exactly where you're coming from. I think that's the right way to look at it. There's no point in, you shouldn't be elected simply on the fact that you're transgender.
Right.
There's one live question that was submitted in the chat here tonight, so I wanted to pull that one up here really quick. And the question is, what is one thing that helped at work after you came out full time?
Honestly, nothing really helps at work, especially because when I work in corporate, I don't have this issue, but I bounce back and forth between corporate and retail, and I've always worked in beauty or makeup retail. And I can say that working in a field that is as vain as beauty, and working in a field that is female led as makeup, being a trans woman is one of the hardest things that I've ever done. It's hard on your mental capacity, it's hard emotionally, it's hard, going into a space where all the girls that you work with are beautiful and they might all be cis. And you're like usually probably like the only trans girl in the store because you're like the inclusion hire, and it's just like every single day it feels like there's this need to show up and be the best version of yourself, and it's just really hard, and I don't think that it ever gets easier. But the thing that I think that helped me throughout the process is just learning that, or going in to these spaces with the intention that nobody has it out for me. Because I think that oftentimes as trans women, we're taught that, these cis women don't like you. They have it out for you. They don't really want what's best for you. They're judging you. They think that you're a man, no matter how nice they are to you, like they don't really like you, And so I've learned to just go into the situation with the best of intention. And that's really helped to soothe my mind in situations before I jump the gun and just assume that something happened because I'm trans,
I like that. No, I think that's a good answer. And I'd say in my situation, something that really treated me well when I went full-time at work was just presenting confidently. Whether or not I was confident inside, it was important that I presented confidently, because when you take a step back, or you apologize, right? If you apologize, something I hear from a lot of trans women is that they apologize like in the restroom or things like that. It's like, no, don't apologize. You deserve to be there. But when you apologize, it allows other people to maintain some sort of a hierarchy over you, that they're better than you, or that you don't deserve to be there. So when you do come out at work and you are full-time, you have to present that confidence that you are you, because people are looking for an opportunity to tear you down. It's not easy. It's not always easy to put that face on, but the confidence you show, especially early on, will make life easier for you in the long run. And then, after too long, it's just second nature and you don't have to worry about it anymore. But up front, when you're ready to go full time, you've got to show the world you're ready and you're you.
Right. Agreed. Agreed.
All right, that is the last question. So, Hope, hold on real quick. I just want to take a moment to talk about next week's show here. Next week is going to be a little bit of a different approach to the show. In light of all that's happening in the world because of COVID-19, transirl will be hosting sort of a fireside chat or an open house style episode. So over the course of an hour, I'll be bringing on multiple guests to share their experiences in quarantine and isolation. And together we're going to be talking about how life is treating us and taking questions from the live chats and talking about how we're all working together to support each other and make it through this difficult time. I hope you'll support us. It's going to be next Thursday, April 2nd, same time and place. So as a reminder, if you'd like to get any notifications when we go live, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, transirl. All of our past episodes plus some bonus clips are available there. And we are also on Facebook as transirl show and Instagram as transirl. So don't forget to like and follow us there. All right, let's bring everyone on together here. Hope, this was a really great conversation. I'm so glad we were able to hook up on here and connect and just talk a little bit, dialogue. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm like, this is so cute, like high tech. I'm like, I feel really like news anchorish, like sitting here.
Right? Isn't it fancy? Right?
Yeah, it's really fancy.
No, your story, your visibility is so important. If you aren't already following Hope on Instagram, go check her out. Let's talk about your website too, really quick.
So it is hopegiselle.com. And there it is. Look at that. So it's hopegiselle.com. There you can find ways to book me. So if you would like me to come and do like a keynote speak, I'm really good with that stuff on a multitude of different topics, as well as my book is available here in the Hopeful shop. I have a little bit of a blog there that I do. So you can like really keep up with like some of my daily thoughts outside of just being trans. I'm a person, I'm a woman. And so I have a bunch of different thoughts that speak for me outside of that. And then on my Instagram, it's just like being able to really see how I connect with the world in a way that I use pictures and photography, as you guys can see. Check that out, look at me. And I use pictures and photography to kind of feel out the day and make cute little videos for you guys to watch and share. So that's me in a nutshell on my social, and it's Hope disguised every single place. Like I try to keep it all fluid. So literally if you Google Hope disguised, all of my information comes up. If you Google Hope Giselle, all of the same information pops up. I am not hard to find.
And she does the best live streams too on Instagram. So please go follow her. They're the best.
And she did one right before the show. Telling everybody to come and visit. So that was the perfect way to test her microphone and make sure everything was working. So a live stream before the live stream. So you can't beat that.
Exactly.
That's it. All right. Well, thank you, Hope. And thank you, Stephen, for running the show. And I hope that you all join us again here next week as we do our open house conversation. With that, everyone have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.